When Senegal's youngest elected president took office, it felt like a small miracle. A country pushed to the edge chose ballots over bullets. Young voters demanded dignity, fairness, and a future that worked. And for a moment, democracy seemed to win. Then came the number no one was supposed to see, $13 billion. Hidden debt, enough to redraw the limits of power overnight, because democracy can choose leaders. But it does not erase balance sheets. And hope, however powerful, cannot refinance a country. Today, Senegal stands at a dangerous intersection between sovereignty and solvency, between popular promises and economic gravity, between what voters demanded and what the numbers allow. If you care about how democracies survive their first real test, this story matters. Stay with me, because Senegal is not an exception. It is a warning, and to understand why this crisis was almost inevitable, we have to step back before the election, before the celebrations, and look at the deeper problem that was quietly building underneath it all. The problem is not that Senegal voted for change. The problem is what change collided with. Voters were clear about their priorities. Lower living costs, real jobs, a government that plays by the rules it enforces. These are not radical demands. They are the basics of political legitimacy. But legitimacy runs on two tracks. One is moral. The other is financial. A government can win elections on dignity and fairness, but it governs inside constraints it did not vote on. Debt ceilings, credit ratings, investor confidence, cash flow. This is where the tension begins. Because every promise made to voters, cheaper food, more jobs, cleaner governance, requires fiscal room to maneuver. And hidden debt removes that room silently, brutally. What looked like a political transition was, in reality, a handover in the middle of a balance sheet crisis. And once that truth surfaced, politics changed tone. From celebration to suspicion, from unity to blame, from hope to pressure. To understand how Senegal arrived at this moment, we need to rewind further past the election cycle and examine how this economic trap was built in the first place. This crisis did not begin with a new president. It began with a familiar pattern. For years, Senegal was praised as a model. Stable, reform-minded, investable, growth looked solid. Infrastructure expanded. Confidence followed, but growth funded by borrowing has a hidden clock. Debt accumulates quietly when revenues lag behind ambition, especially in an economy where most people work informally, where taxation is narrow, and where political incentives reward visible projects over invisible liabilities. Each administration passes the problem forward, not always out of malice, often out of necessity. Global conditions made it easier. Cheap capital, optimistic forecasts, a belief that tomorrow's growth would cover today's gaps. Until it didn't. When debts are hidden, accountability dissolves. Citizens vote without full information, markets price risk incorrectly, and new leaders inherit constraints they never created. So when $13 billion suddenly surfaced, it wasn't just a fiscal shock. It was a reckoning with time, years of postponed choices arriving all at once. And that reckoning would soon collide violently with politics. Because once numbers become public, they demand action. And the first test came fast. The shock landed after the victory, not before it. That timing changed everything. The hidden debt wasn't just large, it was destabilizing. $13 billion is not an accounting error. It is a structural event. Almost overnight, Senegal's creditworthiness collapsed. Confidence thinned, choices narrowed, and suddenly the new leadership faced a question no campaign prepares you for. Who pays for the truth? Debt restructuring loomed as the obvious option. But it carried a stigma, a signal of weakness, a loss of control. So the government pushed back. We will not be treated like a failed state. the message went. Tax mobilization was offered as the alternative. Here is where politics met arithmetic. In a country where nearly 90% of people work informally, taxes are not a lever you can pull. They are a ceiling you hit hard. Voters who demanded affordability now face the prospect of higher costs. Investors listening for stability heard uncertainty instead. This was the first real crisis moment, not because of ideology, but because reality arrived before strategy. And once that door opened, deeper fractures began to show. What emerged next was not just an economic problem, it was a systems problem. Debt does more than limit spending. It reshapes power, quietly, relentlessly. When resources shrink, every decision becomes zero-sum. Every policy creates a loser. And every loser looks for someone to blame. Inside the government, fault lines appeared. Between restraint and confrontation, between managing credibility and asserting sovereignty, calls to renegotiate relationships with external partners carried moral force. But markets don't respond to morality. They respond to predictability. At the same time, refusing restructuring box leaders without external relief, the burden shifted inward, onto taxes, onto spending cuts, onto patience the public did not have. This is the hidden mechanism of debt crises. They turn political allies into rivals, transparency into suspicion, and unity into finger-pointing. Because once the money is gone, trust becomes the most valuable and fragile currency left. And in Senegal, trust was already under strain. Between leaders and between the state and its people, that pressure didn't ease. It intensified, and it would soon produce a second, sharper moment of crisis. The second crisis was quieter and more dangerous. It wasn't triggered by an announcement or a protest. It emerged from hesitation. Investors paused. Projects slowed. Capital waited on the sidelines, not because Senegal lacked potential, but because uncertainty is poison to private investment. Talk of higher taxes raised alarms. Hints of nationalization, even rhetorical, amplified risk. And a downgraded credit rating did the rest. This is how economic stress spreads. Not in headlines, but in delays, in contracts not signed, in jobs not created. The irony is brutal. Job creation was the core promise, but jobs require confidence, and confidence requires clarity. Instead, the country drifted into a holding pattern, too proud to restructure, too constrained to stimulate, too divided to speak with one voice. This is the second crisis moment, when momentum dies, because once expectations turn negative, reversing them takes far more than rhetoric. It takes time and money. Both were now in short supply. And when economies stall, the consequences don't stay abstract. They move quickly downward into everyday life. That's where this story truly becomes personal. The impact on everyday citizens has been profound, because in the end, they're the ones who carry the burden. The promises of a better future, lower costs, better jobs, cleaner governance are colliding with an austerity reality. And the gap between what was promised and what is possible is painfully visible. Imagine a young person, better educated than their parents, yet unable to find stable work. Or a family struggling to make ends meet, facing rising prices and stagnant wages. Or an entrepreneur with a vision for growth, seeing it crumble because investors pull back. This is the human cost of miscalculation. When expectations run high, but the budget runs dry, the result is frustration, disillusionment, and anger. Voters wanted a government that would finally deliver on promises. They didn't ask for more taxes. They didn't ask for delayed growth. They wanted results. And now they're questioning whether their demands are too much or if the system is just too broken to fix. In moments like this, politics becomes personal. It's no longer about ideologies or policies. It's about survival. And for the people of Senegal, it's not just about survival, it's about holding on to hope. But will that hope survive the economic reality? This is where the global impact comes into play. Senegal's crisis is not isolated. It reverberates far beyond its borders. In a world increasingly connected by trade, debt, and geopolitics, one country's struggle can shift the balance in unexpected ways. For Africa, Senegal is both a symbol of promise and a cautionary tale, a beacon of democratic progress now flickering under the weight of unsustainable debt. But this isn't just a lesson for Senegal. It's a message for the world. When countries like Senegal reach their fiscal breaking point, the ripples are felt in global markets, in the financial institutions that once saw them as stable, and in the international aid systems that are already stretched thin. Debt crises don't respect borders. They affect investment flows. They affect trade agreements. They affect stability across regions. When Senegal struggles, investors look elsewhere. When countries default or restructure, trust in developing economies wanes. And when the international system fails to provide a comprehensive solution, it undermines faith in global governance. But Senegal's pain is also an opportunity for action. The world cannot afford to wait for more crises to explode. It must address these imbalances now before they reach the tipping point. This global dimension raises a crucial question. What happens next for Senegal? The future of Senegal depends on the choices it makes today. And there are three potential paths ahead. The best case scenario, a successful negotiation with international creditors leading to debt relief and fiscal support. With external help, Senegal could stabilize its economy, recalibrate its fiscal policies, and refocus on the needs of its citizens, jobs, affordable living, and sustainable growth. This path would restore investor confidence, boost private sector development, and give the people the future they voted for. The middle path, a fragile compromise, limited restructuring combined with austerity measures, this would alleviate some immediate pressure but would come at a cost: stagnant growth, higher taxes, and increased social tension. It could stabilize the economy, but not without creating deep scars in the political and social fabric of the nation. The worst case scenario, a continued spiral of mistrust, economic stagnation, and political fragmentation. Debt obligations overwhelm the state, and the leadership loses its grip on the situation. Social unrest grows, investors flee. The promise of a democratic, sovereign future fades into a harsh reality of economic decline and political fracture. Senegal's future is at a crossroads, but one thing is certain: the choices made today will define not just the next few years, but the very nature of its political and economic system for generations. Now, here's the crucial takeaway. Senegal's story is a microcosm of the broader global struggle to balance political aspirations with economic realities. And in the world we live in today, no nation is immune to these pressures. It's time for global action before it's too late. So, what will Senegal choose? What will the world do to help? The path forward is uncertain, but the consequences of inaction are clear. As we close, let's reflect on what we've seen. Senegal, once a symbol of democratic resilience, now stands at the edge of a precipice. A hidden debt crisis has exposed the vulnerabilities in a system that promised hope but is now straining under its own weight. The leadership faces a stark choice: continue to fight for sovereignty and self-determination, or accept the international support that could stabilize the economy but strip away some of the very principles that made Senegal's transition so inspiring. The world watches, and in many ways, Senegal's story is our story. It is the story of how nations must navigate the complex balance between ambition and reality, between popular will and fiscal constraint. The choices Senegal makes in the coming months will not just affect its future, they will shape the future of democratic governance in an era defined by economic turbulence and global interdependence. So, as we look ahead, The real question is, can Senegal regain its footing, or will it succumb to the pressure? And can the world rise to the occasion and support its path forward before it's too late? The challenge is global, the stakes are high, and the time to act is now. Thank you for watching. Stay informed, stay engaged, and stay hopeful. The future of democracy and the future of Senegal depends on it.